This chapter is covering vessels and circulation. So we first need to go over the anatomy of blood vessels. Remember that there are two primary types of circulation. There's the systemic circulation. There's always also pulmonary circulation that you learned about. The systemic circulation is going to extend to all body regions, while the pulmonary circulation is going to include the vessels that go to and from the lungs. The different groups of blood vessels, first of all, are arteries. These are going to be the ones that carry blood away from the heart. And they're very large when they come out of the heart, like the aorta is, but they become progressively smaller and smaller as they branch and ultimately lead to capillaries. The arterial pathway is going to get smaller as it moves farther from the heart. After the capillaries, then, we have veins, which are going to return blood to the heart, and they become progressively larger and larger as they eventually approach the heart. And the largest of the veins would be the vena cava, which leads directly into the right atrium. The capillaries are the exchange vessels that have the smallest diameter. Each of the blood vessels have layers around them, and those layers are called tunics, and they surround the open region of the blood vessel, which is referred to as the lumen. The first layer surrounding a blood vessel is what's called the tunica intima, and it's also referred to as the endothelium, which is simple squamous epithelium with a subendothelial layer of areola connective tissue. The middle layer surrounding the blood vessel is called the tunica media, and it contains the smooth muscle. Cardiac muscle is only in the heart. In the blood vessels, it's smooth muscle, and it's composed of circularly arranged layers of smooth muscle cells. The outermost layer surrounding the blood vessel is what's called the tunica externa, and the large or thick blood vessels actually require their own network of small vessels on their outer layer called the vasa vasorum. The third group of blood vessels, besides artery and veins, is the capillaries. And capillaries are an exception to this rule. They only have one layer, which is the tunica intima. And this should make sense to you because the main thing that happens in the capillary is diffusion of gases and nutrients. So that's why there's only one layer of thickness. This slide compares the artery, capillary, and the wall. When we look at the artery first on the left side of the diagram, we can see the opening where the blood is called the lumen. And the three layers from inside to out would be the tunica intima, which is endothelium. It has a layer under it called the subendothelial layer. The middle layer is the tunica media, which has all smooth muscle. And when it contracts, it's responsible for causing blood to travel throughout the entire body. The outer layer is the tunica externa. The second group of blood vessels is the vein, and it has the same three layers around it: the tunica intima, the tunica media, and tunica externa. But what I want you to notice specifically is that the middle layer, which is the tunica media, is thinner for the vein than the artery. Also, the tunica externa is thicker than the artery. So if we look at tunica media here, which is shown right here, you can see it's very, very thin compared to that of the artery, where it's much thicker. The other difference is the tunica externa right here It's thicker in the vein than it is in the artery. The third blood vessel is the capillary, which is responsible for the exchange of gases and nutrients. And it forms a bed, so there are many capillaries that the arteriole from the artery leads into. The capillaries are only going to have that tunica intima, which is the endothelium. So that's an important difference to make sure you know about capillaries. This slide is showing the microscopic anatomy of the artery versus the vein, and you should be able to tell the difference. With the artery, the big thing is the significance of the tunica media. Notice how it is much thicker here than it is up here for the vein. It's very thin for the vein. So that's one significant difference, is the tunica media. The other difference is the tunica externa for the artery and vein. Be sure that you notice for the artery how it is thin compared to the vein, where it's a little bit thicker. For the other difference is the shape of the lumen. The lumen is all this area here. There's some red blood cells in it, where it's going to be much larger than it is for the artery. This is the artery, which has a lot more red blood cells in it than the vein, but it's much smaller than that of the vein. So when we compare the arteries and veins, we first notice the difference of the lumen, the width. It's going to be narrower in the artery compared to the vein. So it's wider in the vein compared to the artery. The wall thickness is going to be much thicker in the artery compared to the vein. That's predominantly because of the tunica media, which is the thickest in the artery. It's the thickest tunic for the vein is the tunica externa. As far as the valves, there are no valves that are present in the arteries. There's only valves that are present in the veins. Finally, for the blood pressure is going to be much higher than in the veins and lowest in the veins, which get closer to the heart. So again, it's highest in the arteries and lowest in the vein. So it's highest, the closest to the heart, like the aorta, and then it'll start to decrease as it gets further away from the heart. It's lower in the capillaries, but even lower in the veins, and it'll continue to decrease as it gets back towards the heart. So the lowest blood pressure in the veins is actually found in the vena cava. This is showing the comparison of all the different vessels. The arteries, there's actually three groups of arteries based on the what is making up the different intima, or the different tunics. So notice in the arteries, it has the thickest tunica media. That media is going to decrease as we go from the elastic artery to the muscular artery to eventually the arterial. For the capillary, remember that we only have the endothelium, which is the tunica intima. And then as far as the veins, we have three different groups of veins, from venules to small to medium, and finally the large vein. Notice that all of them are going to have a thicker tunica externa than what the arteries have. The other important thing is that there are valves which are present in some of the veins, and that helps to ensure that blood is going to be going in a unidirectional direction back towards the right side of the heart. The arteries are going to transport blood away from the heart. The three types are the elastic arteries, which are the largest, and they're closest to the heart. Things like the aorta, pulmonary trunk, and brachiocephalic arteries. The next group of arteries would be the muscular ones, and they are medium-sized, like the brachial artery, which is in the upper arm. And then finally, the smallest arteries are arterioles. These lead directly into the capillaries. This slide is showing you some micrographs of arteries. And notice for the elastic artery, we have a very thick tunica media. For the muscular artery, we also have a tunica media, but it's not as thick as the elastic artery. And then finally, for the arterial, you can see how the tunica media only has really a few layers of smooth muscle.